Hi, I'm Bob Iotti here with Adam Sussman once again to talk about the SEC Roundtable. We're going to talk about Panel 2 today. And Adam, why don't you distinguish the differences between Panel 2 and then the one we saw this morning?
Well, first, there was a slightly different makeup in terms of the folks that were on the second panel. It was actually a much more interesting split in terms of folks' interests. So you had two buy-side folks, two proprietary traders. You had a couple of brokers, and then two academics. And so that really created kind of more of an environment for fireworks, frankly, than in the first panel, where there was mostly, there was more consensus among the panelists.
Yeah, and you even had the difference in the brokers. You had Jeff Wecker on one side, who effectively services the high-frequency trading sector, and the other side you had Sal from Themis Trading, who has been very vocal person around pushing up against the high-frequency trading.
Yeah, and even among the buy side, the two buy side guys, Dave Cushing and Kevin Cronin, you had differences in kind of their views as well. And I thought one of the more interesting exchanges came between Rich Gorlick from RGM and Sal from Themis, where Sal was kind of questioning, hey, everyone talks about the quality of markets. Who is this really a better market for, and kind of gave this example of how he trades and how he felt like he gets his orders are compromised during that, and Rich came back and said, hey, we've done every study that we've done has shown that the quality of markets has improved over the last 10 years. And then Sal kind of shot back and said, well, that's the reason why you don't see a lot of anti-high frequency studies is because no one has the data, as if the data that everyone is using is somehow proprietary. Whereas I think anyone who's read the studies understands that most of the data that they're using is publicly available data. We're talking about quoted spreads, realized spreads, effective spreads. I mean, things that we've done as well. And so I thought that was kind of one of the interesting debates going back and forth.
Yeah, I thought it was evident that there was some faction in that discussion around trying to separate high-frequency trading from non-high frequency trading, to your point, around as if it's very clearly distinguishable. There are certain elements that make for high-frequency trading or not. There's certain data that's available to or out of high-frequency trading versus not. And I think that was one of the interesting points of discussion between, really among everyone on that panel. And I think that there were some very clear distinctions made by those that we would consider high-frequency traders, or are typically considered high-frequency traders, like the prop shops. And I think Steve Schuler and Rich Gorlick in particular were very strong in their influence around how they trade and how the markets effectively are fair, although there were points made around really two or three very consistent points. One was around speed. One was somewhat related to speed, but separate, talking about co-location.
Right.
The third part went to your point around efficient trading or quality of markets.
Right.
And I think those were the key points of the what you might call a debate in that session. Why don't you talk about any or all of those?
Yeah, well, I thought one of the interesting things that Rich Gorlick from RGM said was that, hey, co-location actually levels the playing field, because here I am with my firm that operates out of Austin, Texas, and by being able to place my servers in New York, that allows me to compete even though I'm located in Austin. So I thought that was kind of an interesting shift in the way that most people view co-location. I thought the other interesting point was brought up by Dave Cushing in terms of speed, where he was really saying, well, how fast is enough speed, and is there such a thing as too much speed? In his examples, which we can kind of debate the merits of the analogies, between everyone driving SUVs, right, which I mean are slower than fast cars, but and then taking two Tylenols versus
the whole bottle
versus a whole bottle. But I thought he brought up an interesting point, which was, okay, a couple of years ago we were at 10 millisecond executions. Now we've gone beyond that. Is there a point where we've gone fast enough?
Well, and I think his point highlights the issue of what is most efficient. I think his point about the 10 milliseconds was, hey, we were at 10 milliseconds a year ago, and nobody thought we were slow.
Right.
And now we're much faster than that. And is that a good thing or not a good thing? And obviously, the theme that he was trying to get across is that just because we can doesn't mean we should. And that was the argument he made with the fast car, and you can't drive 170 miles an hour in Massachusetts.
Right.
And I think equating speed with efficient markets isn't necessarily a good parallel.
Right.
I think there were other points of that discussion that need to be made that he didn't make. He introduced the issue of speed, and I think to some extent what he was trying to do was show that with the Tylenol example and the car example, show that we don't always have to push to our limits of capability. But in reality, he never went back and equated that to, well, the market's not efficient because we're going so fast.
Right.
And were we truly efficient at 10 milliseconds, or could you make an argument that, well, we're not efficient at 10 milliseconds if you can do it at 9 milliseconds or 8 milliseconds?
Right.
And that debate didn't come up, and I think that would have been an interesting discussion, especially among the fastest of the fast on that panel.
Well, I also thought an interesting thing that and I can't remember who on the panel brought it up, but they're basically asking Steve Schuler from Gecko, saying, well, hey, you said that the latency between Chicago and New York is not a problem for you, right? That his firm is located in Chicago, and trading between those markets is not a big deal. And then the other panelist said, well, if you're not worried about the latency between Chicago and New York, why are you so adamant that we should, that the market should go as fast as possible? And I think what wasn't said, the panel just naturally kind of moved on to another topic, but that was relevant, is that it's all about the relative speed, right? Right. So, okay, it's fine, if data has to travel from Chicago to New York and it takes however long.
About 4 milliseconds, I think, and then 8 milliseconds round trip.
Which I think is too little, right? I think it's longer than that, but I thought the point was, well, as long as I can get there as fast as anybody else or faster, then it's okay. So I thought that was, that it was an interesting kind of question, Q&A that got cut off. But
yeah, Steve Schuler followed up with that. I think the original point was made by one of the academics, if I'm University of Massachusetts or at that point. I think he made the point, and I think Steve Schuler stepped in and talked about, again, brought up his position in Chicago, and basically made the point that he refuted it, and just talked about how efficient his particular opportunities are at 4 milliseconds or whatever it is. And actually, the 4 milliseconds was, I think, pure speed of light. But anyway, so I think overall the session this afternoon was certainly more vibrant. I think the panelists were more open, somewhat more defensive of their own positions. Right. And I think they came to the table prepared to argue more strongly for their position, say, than the panel this morning, which was a little more reserved and less confrontational, maybe, if you look at it.
And I think what will be really interesting for the third panel, which is going to focus on dark pools and undisplayed liquidity, is going to be how the commissioners take some of the output from the first two panels and incorporated that in the third. Because one of the things that there seemed to be consensus on was fragmentation and the need for better incentives to protect limit orders, throughout the system, and that would probably have the most impact on operators of dark pools.
Yep. And with that, we'll close this session and look forward to our summary of panel 3 later on today. Thanks for your time. I'm Bob Ayati with Adam Sussman.